So my name is François Bergère. I'm the Executive Director of the Long-Term Infrastructure Investors Association, otherwise known as LTIA, and I have the privilege today of moderating a very distinguished set of panelists. Let me just introduce them a little bit more to you. So right on my left, we have Samaila Subaru. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Finance Corporation. Some of you may not yet be familiar with AFC. It's a Pan-African multilateral financial institution set up in 2007, and one that is interesting by the fact that it's basically majority financed by private organization, private investors, and not by member states. So a slightly different player in the field of multilaterals. Then we have Monsieur Abdellatif Zaghnoun. Abdellatif Zaghnoun is directeur général de la Caisse des dépôts et gestion du Maroc, la Banque de développement du Maroc. Et auparavant, il a été vice-président de l'Organisation des douanes internationales. Mr. Zaghnoun will speak in French and express himself in French, so I would invite you and suggest that those of you that don't speak French can sort of put on the headset in due time to fully follow the discussion, the bilateral exchanges we'll have with Mr. Zaghnoun. We then have Matthew Momen, the Global Head of Infrastructure at Crédit Agricole CIB, with an extensive experience in project finance deals, in energy and infrastructure in UK, Europe, and really across the world, in a global remit. And last but not least, we have Ms. Keiko Honda, Chief Executive Officer of MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, a well-known arm of the World Bank Group, supporting cross-border investors and lenders in developing countries against a varied array of public sector risks. She's also on the investment committee of the UN. So our panel has been asked to discuss innovative financing solutions and to address needs of transforming economies. Let me first emphasize that by transforming economies, we've decided to focus on emerging markets, specifically based on the professional profiles and backgrounds of our panelists. I mean, it's well known that financial and development stakes of infrastructure investment in emerging markets are a concern for everyone, developing and developed economies alike. They were conditioned, as we heard this morning, to eventually meet the SDG and the Paris Accord agreement, and more broadly, sustain growth and stability globally. There's a recognition that official development assistance and budget will not be enough. We need to crowd in private sector participation in order to reach those goals. But at the same time, the track record so far has been let's say it, a bit disappointing in terms of actual amounts effectively leveraged and mobilized. I believe the private participation in infrastructure database held by the World Bank pointed to less than $100 billion of investment traceable to the private sector in infrastructure last year, which is obviously way off the kind of amount we need to leverage and catalyze. So, no question, we need to be creative, innovative, manage constraints, test new approaches, and that's what we're going to discuss today. So let me maybe begin with you, ladies first. Keiko, maybe you could tell us how do you define a concept that stands behind many such innovation to better leverage the private sector. I'm referring to blended finance as a way to de-risk and increase attractivity, and how MIGA works in that respect.
Francis, first of all, thank you for the very nice introductions and having me on this panel. The Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, or MIGA, do not extend equity investment, nor the loans. We mitigate political risks and enhance credit for sovereign, sub-sovereign, and some of the SOEs with certain credit for cross-border private investors. MIGA guarantees cover both construction and operation period of project and extend relatively long tenors, such as 15 years. Over the years, I have witnessed firsthand that a key role private sector finance plays in helping developing countries meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Since 2014, private investment with MEGA guarantee have provided almost 50 million people with access to power. So 50 million, that is the population of Spain. And also, ESG investment now is the fashion. Many of you have heard on August 19th, even in the US, Business Roundtable, including the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, announced they will not only address maximizing the profit of the shareholders, but they do address for the society and employees and beyond. So this is actually a great time. Therefore, I do understand expectations for the MDBs like us are high. In calendar year 2018, MDBs directly mobilized $46 billion. I know this is not enough, but we are getting there. MEGA has doubled our annual guarantee as well as portfolio in the last 6 years. So we are growing. And I do understand that we have to be very creative. So we have to work differently. We're doing 3 things. Number one, this is not only MEGA, but this is the World Bank group-wide initiative called IDA, Private Sector Window. World Bank has a 2 balance sheet. First balance sheet called IBRD, this is their real name, is the balance sheet for World Bank to provide a loan to the middle-income country. But to keep the AAA rating of the IBRD, we have been raising the funds every 3 years and put into the balance sheet called IDA, IDA, we lead by some reason IDA. And 2 years ago, this is the first time our donor countries enabled us to use some part of the IDA to allow us to help close-border private investors like you to going into more riskier country, which through taking the first loss. So this enabled us to navigate you to countries like Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, and sometimes beyond. So this is one innovation. And we have been a discussion at the next IDA refreshment, and we are getting nice feedback, including French government, to continue to have this, so therefore we can continue to do this. I think another thing we are really doing is collaboration with the other MDBs. Many of you got frustrated because each MDB has a slightly different product, slightly different restriction. But donor governments obviously giving us a slightly different mandates. So, just look at a slightly different way. You may not be happy. You have to deal with multiple organizations, but multiple MDBs brings a slightly different mitigation. So especially if you're going into a difficult countries or challenging project, longer tenor, please think about combining a couple of institutions. As a matter of fact, G20 Eminent Persons Group, a G20 advisory group, recommended that other MDBs leverage MEGA. And earlier this year, G20 Finance Minister communique actually did include that MEGA to work closely with them. To do so, we have standardized our guarantee contract. Now it's available on our website. And we also enhancing our partnership. EBRD, ADB, and Islamic Development Bank has already renewed the agreement with us. Also, we have worked with almost all MDBs on a project and collectively total MEGA guarantee of over $8 billion. So we are getting there. Also, I think another thing, so we like to be innovative. We've been always seeking ways to innovate our guarantee in new ways. For example, to support Meridian's investment in the healthcare infrastructure, we extended the political risk insurance to the project bond by teaming up with the EBRD. The bond was then rated 4 notches above the sovereign rating from Moody's. We can replicate this structure at any time. But we have one challenge. Most of you probably never heard about MEGA, so we need to increase the awareness of how MEGA can support private investors. I am here with my MEGA senior members. I don't know where they are, if they are here. Okay, here you are. Jan, he's a senior underwriter of Paris office. He speaks proper French. I'm so sorry, I don't. My apology. My French is, our portfolio has been progressing, but not my French. We also have Olga Skolsky. She's with the yellow jacket toward the end. She's the acting head of the EMEA. So please talk with them. We are available to work with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Keiko. Indeed, this kind of meeting is also to better disseminate and make known the kind of offer that is in the market. Now, turning to you, Matthew, as a representative of a large commercial and investment bank, would you maybe share with us your insights about how you see the current challenges facing a commercial bank when it comes to financing, mostly long-term and illiquid investment in a relatively high-risk environment like emerging markets?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Francis, and delighted to be here today. So good afternoon, everyone. From Crédit Agricole's perspective, what are our key drivers? Well, we're a leading commercial project finance bank who provide capital markets, advisory, and arranging services for our clients on a global basis. We follow our clients across the globe. We're looking to invest in ESG sustainable projects, and we were one of the founding partners in the Equator Principles as well. So that's crucial for the bank. We're very, very active in supporting projects for transitioning economies on a global basis across Asia and particularly Latin America in key subsectors such as the energy transition, into telecoms and data, and also in transportation. Two key trends we're seeing. As I mentioned earlier, we're following our client base across the globe. And that gives us ultimately, and we have a finite balance sheet as well, just in terms of orders of magnitude. The bank, in terms of project finance, is investing somewhere between $5 and $6 billion a year into those various subsectors. So we can't do everything ourselves, but we are looking to work with clients on a global basis. What are we seeing in terms of trends there? Our corporate client base now is spending more time looking at the emerging or transitioning economies. Why? The traditional heartlands, some of the key European economies have slowed down in terms of the need for greenfield infrastructure. So it requires them to look further afield for new projects. So what we're seeing, some of them is rotating out of traditional mature assets, freeing up capital and investing in greenfield projects in emerging markets. That's the first thing. Second thing, on the financial investor side, where we have a huge client base there, investing in alternative assets, we see a huge demand from the financial investor universe to invest on the equity side and debt side into various projects in emerging and transitioning economies. Why is that? Everyone's heard this on a regular basis. There's a wall of capital out there and liquidity out there chasing projects. We've seen a run-up in asset pricing in traditional core sectors and core OECD markets. So those investors and LPs now are looking at investing in transitional economies where they may see more attractive risk-return premiums. But with that, I think Francis asked me the question of what challenges do we face? Well, as we move out of a traditional developed or OECD market, what do we see from a banking standpoint? Well, two things really at a very high level. Firstly, higher risk. Secondly, lower liquidity. That combination from a banking standpoint difficult to manage. Why is that? I come back to the original point. The point is we have a scarce balance sheet that we need to see rotate on a regular basis. And those two combinations are quite difficult, particularly when you're dealing with energy and infrastructure assets, which are long dated, where you see that, and particularly as you go from construction into operation, you see a transition of rating, and therefore you expect to see additional liquidity coming in. And in some of the emerging markets, we don't see that. And so facilitating, some of the challenges there are, how do we facilitate greater velocity? Turn back to colleagues on the multilaterals. That's the first point around liquidity. Second point is around risk. What additional risks? I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but key risks there that we face as we step into those markets. Typically, we're facing full onshore risks around facing government counterparties that may or may not be acceptable from a commercial perspective in totality. Secondly, FX risks, where there's the need, particularly for many projects where there's no proven offshore revenue stream. So you're facing full convertibility and availability issues, which is a challenge. And then thirdly is, which I think is a key enabler, is stability, both in terms of regulatory and political framework. And also, I think importantly, finally, is a pipeline. When you're investing and looking at a project in a new market, from a commercial perspective, there's a large amount of investment. Many of you will be familiar with that, to get a project over the line. And if you're investing in a project, firstly, you're spending a lot of time, you're investing resources, not just capital, but human. You need to ensure that there is a return around that. And what do I mean by that? I mean a pipeline of follow-on opportunities. So those aren't always obvious in many of the transitional emerging markets. I think there are a few that are quite interesting. One particular we're following very carefully is in Morocco, where the bank has a local presence. We see a presence of a pipeline there and a PPP framework that's well developed and emerging and creating the sort of bankability framework that we like to see to invest in transactions.
Thank you, Norman. So you've provided me with the ideal transition to now turn to Abdelatif Zagnoun. So I'll switch to French if you want to put on your headset. Monsieur Zagnoun, donc, vous représentez ici un acteur majeur du développement au Maroc, une institution publique, la Caisse des dépôts et des gestions. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous préciser peut-être le champ couvert par votre institution, plus particulièrement dans le domaine des infrastructures, et la façon dont vous essayez de prendre en compte ces challenges, ces risques qui ont été évoqués, qu'il s'agisse de risques pays, de risques liés à la convertibilité ou à la stabilité, l'environnement politique ou réglementaire. Comment un acteur comme le vôtre peut-il contribuer à répondre à ces défis qui se posent aux investisseurs privés dans cette optique?
Merci. Tout d'abord, je vous souhaite la bienvenue et je tiens à remercier les organisateurs de m'avoir convié à ce panel. La Caisse de dépôt et de gestion du Maroc est une entité financière publique créée en 1959 et qui a pour mission essentielle de collecter l'épargne, notamment l'épargne réglementée, de les sécuriser, de les pérenniser et de les rémunérer. Tout ça, c'est de par la loi. Et également de canaliser une partie de cette épargne pour financer les grands projets structurants et pour contribuer, par conséquent, au développement économique et social de notre pays. Alors, je voudrais rappeler que durant les 15 dernières années, le Maroc s'est engagé dans une dynamique de développement très volontariste. Ce développement qui est fondé sur deux piliers importants. Un, la mise en place des stratégies sectorielles dans différents domaines, que ce soit l'agriculture, l'agro-industrie, l'industrie, notamment ce qui est émergence industrielle, des métiers mondiaux, les écosystèmes industriels, mais également dans le tourisme, dans l'offshoring et dans l'aéronautique. Et deuxième pilier, il concerne l'investissement dans des grandes infrastructures d'accès pour créer un cadre qui favorise l'attractivité des investisseurs, notamment des investisseurs privés. La CDG a été en appui à cette stratégie de développement en mettant à profit ses capacités financières, mais aussi ses capacités opérationnelles compte tenu de l'expérience accumulée durant les 60 années d'existence. Pour illustrer mes propos, je vais donner quelques exemples. Le premier domaine d'investissement, c'est tout ce qui est zone d'activité économique. Et notre groupe a investi dans différentes zones industrielles, des zones de l'offshoring, des agropoles, dans différentes régions du Maroc. Au total, nous avons aménagé plus de 800 hectares comme zone d'activité économique. Et le parc offshoring, par exemple, de Casablanca, c'est l'un des parcs les plus grands du pays et qui aujourd'hui emploie plus de 30 000 personnes. Autre domaine d'activité, c'est l'accompagnement de notre pays dans l'émergence de nouvelles villes et de nouveaux pôles urbains intégrés. Pour ne citer que deux cas, le pôle urbain d'Anfa de Casablanca, c'est la reconversion de l'ancien aéroport en un pôle urbain intégré avec toutes ses composantes touristiques, services, résidentiels, et également la construction d'une nouvelle ville entre Rabat et Kazakh, baptisée nouvelle ville de Znata, sur à peu près 1800 hectares, qui va accueillir 300 000 habitants, et c'est un projet inclusif et qui intègre la dimension développement durable sur toutes ses composantes. À titre d'exemple, sur les 1800 hectares, nous avons consacré 500 hectares pour les espaces verts, ce qui donne un ratio de 20 mètres carrés par habitant, qui est pratiquement le double, enfin 19 mètres carrés par habitant, qui est pratiquement le double de la norme exigée par l'OMS, qui est de 10 mètres carrés par habitant. Elle est également inclusive parce que nous avons décidé de réinstaller toutes les industries, toutes les existantes dans le voisinage, dans une zone industrielle dédiée qui travaille, qui opère aux standards internationaux. Et même les populations qui ont été expropriées ont été réinstallées dans le projet, pour dire également que la dimension climat, la dimension sociale est très présente dans ce projet-là. Autre exemple que je peux citer, c'est le financement des stations, le développement et le financement des stations touristiques. Nous sommes sur deux grandes stations touristiques, une au sud sur 500 hectares et l'autre à l'oriental sur 600 hectares. C'est des stations touristiques avec différentes composantes hôtelières, mais également différentes composantes d'animation. Et là également, c'est des cités éco-climat et qui sont certifiées HQE. De manière prospective, et dans le cadre de la mise en place de la nouvelle stratégie du groupe CDG, à l'horizon 2022, nous avons opéré de nouveaux choix en ligne avec les grands enjeux économiques du Maroc, et que je qualifie de 4. 1. La mise en place de la régionalisation avancée. Pour les régions aujourd'hui sont dotées des prérogatives très importantes et des moyens financiers importants. L'objectif, c'est que ces régions puissent opérer des transformations économiques réelles et en créant plus de valeur ajoutée, plus d'emplois. Deuxième enjeu, c'est la transition énergétique et dans ces deux composantes les plus importantes, les énergies renouvelables et l'efficacité énergétique, et également la transition digitale, numérique. Et le quatrième enjeu, c'est l'amélioration du taux de croissance en opérant des transformations profondes de son tissu productif. Alors, par rapport à cela, nous avons essayé d'opérer un nouveau positionnement pour ne prendre que le cas de l'accompagnement du Maroc dans sa transition énergétique. Nous avons opéré des investissements importants, aussi bien en matière, au niveau de la production des énergies renouvelables. Et je rappelle que l'objectif assigné pour le Maroc par rapport aux énergies renouvelables, c'est d'atteindre un niveau de 52% de la capacité installée à l'horizon 2030. Deuxième volet, c'est tout ce qui est efficacité énergétique. Et là également, on se propose pour accompagner le pays dans la réalisation des objectifs fixé dans ce cadre et qui est de l'ordre de réduction de la consommation énergétique de 20% à l'horizon 2030. Nous sommes également présents dans le domaine de l'eau parce que nous sommes en train de développer, en partenariat avec l'opérateur espagnol Abengoa, une grande station de dessalement de l'eau de mer à Agadir d'une capacité de 400 000 mètres cubes par jour. C'est l'un des plus grands projets de l'Afrique. Une partie sera dédiée à l'irrigation et l'autre sera dédiée donc à la population, donc eau potable. Et pour vous dire que nous sommes vraiment un acteur important et structurant pour le pays en l'accompagnant dans des grands projets structurants. Merci.
Merci, M. Zagnoun. Je crois qu'on a bien compris, effectivement, que vous étiez un acteur clé. On reviendra peut-être, si on a un moment, sur la façon dont vous pouvez vous articuler avec des investisseurs ou des financeurs privés sur certains de vos projets. But now, I'd like to turn to Mr. Subairo. So we mentioned the fact that the African Finance Corporation was a very specific institution, one that is majority owned by private, financial, and African, I would say, African-based institutions. Has it had any influence or leeway on the way that you envision your business, the way that you effectively identify, select, and structure your financings?
Yeah. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this dialogue. A few words about Africa Finance Corporation. Africa Finance Corporation was established in 2007 by a treaty of sovereign African states to create a multilateral financial institution that will focus on providing solutions to Africa's growing infrastructure deficit and challenging business environment by developing and financing infrastructure, natural resource, and industrial assets that seeks to enhance the productivity and economic growth of African states. When we were created in 2007, the investment required in that space was essentially about $30 billion annually. That number has grown now to about 170 billion. If we look at the trend, the highest need is in water and sanitation, where about $67 billion is required annually. Next to that is energy, where about $50 billion is required. Transport and logistics requires about 47 billion, and ICT requires about 7. On average, African states invest about 77 billion annually, mainly African governments themselves. Then we have the multilaterals, we have other private investors, and then we have Chinese investors as well in that tranche of 77 billion. But the key point to note is that there's a gap between what is required and what is invested, and that really is the opportunity space in which AFC plays. So AFC was created to increase the pipeline of bankable projects, or now I would say viable projects, by doing the development. So doing the de-risking that will allow us to invest our capital and also mobilize additional capital, institutional capital, to come alongside us. Some of the key projects we've done, we did the first wind farm in Cape Verde, which provides 20% of the energy requirements of the state. After our development, we had Sweet Fund and other European DFIs coming to invest alongside us in that project. We've also done a hydro power plant in Côte d'Ivoire, where we're working with MIGA to provide political risk insurance in that space. We actually did the first IPP in Ghana. We created the regulatory environment for the investment to take place. We actually, at that point, actually hired lawyers for the government so that they have the relevant counterparty to guide them through the negotiation process. Why? Because when you're looking at infrastructure, you're looking at 15, 20 years and above. So clearly, whatever you're doing now is going to go through probably 2 or 3 governments. So you need to have that in mind as you create the projects to ensure that you have something that is bankable and viable that can stand the test of time. We're doing a wind farm in Djibouti now, where I will talk about some of the innovations that we're doing. So what we've realized is that institutional capital doesn't like construction risk. So the way to de-risk is for us to take the construction risk ourselves. and we work with other similar multilaterals and DFIs that have development outlook, and we would do the initial development, do the construction, and then when there is cash flows in the business, then we now bring on debt. We found that this was a way to increase the pace of projects and to increase deployment of capital into the continent. We've also invested in a special economic zone in Gabon, where we essentially work with the government to transition the economy from just oil revenues and export of logs of wood into an industrial economy. So what we did there was we looked at the entire value chain that they have for wood export and changed it. We de-risked it, created several layers, and we built an industrial zone, and we acquired the relevant infrastructure that will allow us to transform that business. So essentially, we ended up with a massive infrastructure, which includes 2 ports, actually 3 in the beginning. We've sold one of the ports. We have the airports, and we have the rail tracks, and all the infrastructure and logistics required to bring goods from the country down to for export. So what we've seen is that we've worked with the state to increase the earnings from a CBM of wood, which was 30, 50 euros, now to 150, 180 euros. Gabon has also grown to be one of the largest exporters of veneer. We have actually moved to a point whereby we have about 90% utilization of the wood at the industrial zone. So we've significantly increased value addition in that. That employs about 5,000 people presently in the economic zone, and we've created 2 companies out of that. We've created a port and logistic company that has grown footprints to Mauritania and Cote d'Ivoire. We've grown an industrial zone platform company that is looking at other West African countries as to replicate that success. So what we've realized is that we need to create those platform companies so that you can have a stream of cash flows that are existing, and then you have a pipeline of projects that you can invest in. With the cash flows that exist, it is easier to attract institutional capital to come in to that business, and then you can get more people come alongside us after we have done the de-risking. We are also looking at how we can reduce the risks by providing local currency financing. So there we have a framework right now where we're working with central banks to create currency swaps. These currency swaps allow us to invest local currency in the project, because don't forget, even though we're a dollar balance sheet, so we're a dollar-based company, so we have dollar balance sheet. We are rated by Moody's A3. We have access to Eurobonds. So we just have dollars. But it's not all the projects that earn dollars. So you have, some of them earn local currency. We find that where it's local currency that's earned, it's better to have local currency financing. But the challenge is in most of the markets, the local currency is expensive and is of a short duration. So what we did, together with Sovereign Wealth Fund in one of the countries, we created an infrastructure credit guarantee company. So what that does is it provides guarantees to pension funds, allows them to take, I would say, positions mainly in debt for infrastructure projects. We've seen that that still has the challenge of expensive interest rates, which is why we've moved to the currency swaps, where we think we've agreed a framework with 2 countries now, where we can have single-digit funding for 10 years to start with in local currency. And based on the success of that, we think that we can replicate that. So from the work we've done over the last 11 years, we think that the big challenge we have is that there is really no allocation for investments into Africa. So there's a huge need, like I mentioned, but there is no allocation for investment in Africa. And what happens most times, even for a rated institution like ourselves, we have to just, keep talking to the same people, singing the same songs, to get the capital we need to deploy. We think that that needs to change if we're talking about innovation, especially since we know that there is almost $16, $17 trillion earning negative yield. And over the next 5-10 years, it will be lost capital for those investors. So we think it's important to look at a framework that allows that capital to flow into Africa. We have done something. We work with some European insurance and pension funds to fund a project in Côte d'Ivoire, wherein we had a risk mitigation strategy where there was a specific tariff, a levy by the state to support the cash flows of that entity. We had a specific cash sweep arrangements for cash flow. And then, of course, we have our preferred creditor status, which most multilateral institutions have, that allows us to provide a wrap. So we think that structures like that, should be replicated. Essentially, securitization is the key going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zubair. Quite impressive and pretty exciting, actually, to hear you mention all these new developments that you are engaged on to take on some of the challenges that were mentioned before, and understand sort of covering a wide scope from technical assistance all the way to specific financing tools. Now, going back to you, Matthew, we have but a few minutes left, but you've heard about the various tools, platforms, initiatives that have been developed over the last years by a number of MDBs, in particular those present here, in issues like de-risking, providing liquidity guarantee or takeout for refinancing. We've talked about technical assistance, structuring, making sure that there's access to some kind of local currency financing. Is it enough for a commercial lender like you to effectively feel fully confident about scaling up and increasing their volume of commitments and convincing somehow their corporate clients to go further in emerging markets? Are there still issues that you think that MDBs or DFIs or other public sector institutions could do more of or better?
Yeah, it's a good point, Francis. I mean, look, where we see, and I think if you look across the different transitioning economies, I think you take a different view. As I said, we've been heavy investors in the Asian and Latin American markets, where we see a more developed approach there in terms of institutional market and access to capital markets. So I think there, what we're seeing a much more preeminent involvement of banks and debt investors right now, because they're seeing that particularly on the banking side, that opportunity to rotate capital, which I said was crucial for us and the involvement on the banking side. Look, it doesn't come down to the debt structuring on an individual deal. I think you have to feel comfortable that those markets exist to allocate capital. Look, we can do a given project and we can lend long term. We do that on various different projects. That's not the issue. We could go in and allocate a form of capital to the right bankable structure. The problem is, if that's on a 15 or an 18-year basis, that capital is stuck and there's no ability to rotate that. As banks, what we're looking at, what's our role? Our role is very similar to AFC. Our view is we facilitate the development and construction of assets, and then after that, we look for a path and a refinancing and a takeout. We're not providing 20-year money. Our balance sheets aren't designed to do that. So the crucial point there is facilitating the development and the maturity of the capital, the markets that sit behind it. It's fine to have a refinancing guarantee, great, but who's providing the money to take us out? So I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg, and yeah, it's not going to get solved. It doesn't get solved overnight, but it is about gradually working up the mechanism to encourage institutional investors and other enablers to bring in that form of liquidity post completion.
Yeah, indeed. We don't have any institutional investor present here, but from our association activity, we do know indeed that a number of them are keen to effectively engage, provided the ground has been prepared and a number of initiatives have been scaled up and standardized. They're pretty keen to effectively explore these new opportunities in emerging markets in the field of infrastructure. Now, I'm aware that time is running out very quickly, so maybe at this stage we could turn towards the audience and check whether there's any burning question waiting to be asked before we sort of wrap up the session.
Raise your hand. Can somebody give her a microphone? One of the hostesses present? Here, I'll just...
Arnaud, Solmondo, we are a political risk insurance broker. We spoke this morning about market failure, and I wonder about political risk investment cover. How would you describe the market failure, and how do you check the additionality?
So yeah, indeed, an issue we touched upon when preparing the panel, how to make sure there's no overreach or crowding out, and we stick to additionality, maybe without entering too much in the details because we don't have much time. Maybe, Keiko, you could tell us and how do you try and take this into account?
Sure, thank you very much, Francis. Additionality, we have to prove for every single project to the board consisted of 181 member countries. But I think, there are several of them, but I think why don't we just going to address for this asset recycling that just Matthew brought up. For us, asset recycling is also very, very important to expand the breadth and width of the private investors. Let me take a good example. This is Cambodia. We recently supported refinancing of the grid, bringing in one European and one Japanese, both of them reasonably conservative banks. Why it's really possible? For a couple of things. Number one, we can go long tenor. So therefore, we can cover construction time and operation time in one guarantee. And also, we are multilateral. We're covering 181 member countries. So therefore, chance for you to find the next asset owner of the loan or the equity is actually pretty high. Therefore, we are welcoming. That's actually, I was talking with the CEO's BIAL this morning. If AFC or Kashif can cover the construction term, but you can pass it over your equity or loan assets to the next owner, while MIGA continue to stay. I think this kind of additionality that we can continue to support and then serve AFC, Kashif, and then also people in this room.
I'm afraid we're now reaching the end of our time slot. There would be many other issues, I'm sure, that could be discussed under this general innovative financing solution panel. But at this stage, I'd like to ask you to join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.